Marina. Thank you very much to our speakers. And who knows, maybe we'll convene next year. We'll make the 10,000-kilometer trip to Japan. Thank you. Wonderful. So, we've come a long way in the last 3 days. Think back with me. We started our conversation on fighting hunger with Earthren Cousin. And then we focused on justice, and we heard about Chime for Change with Salma Hayek. You might remember after that, we had a wonderful panel of women change makers with Sue Thompson. They told their personal stories of change. And then we learned about the problems of youth employment, especially in the OECD region. Yesterday, we met new tech pioneers, the entrepreneurs who came and spoke to us, and we looked into our digital future with Maurice Lévy. We talked about the social enterprise. And then Christine Lagarde took us into the IMF and the work that they're doing to tackle inequality. And this morning, we've already been back and forth from Japan. We've come a long way in the last 3 days. How does it all tie together? That's what we're going to do next. We have a very interesting panel that's going to look at the big question: what improvements realistically can be made in women's rights and empowerment in the next 10 years? What is our roadmap for the future? So I'd like to invite our speakers for the next session. I'm looking around for them. There you are. And I'd like to bring forward Theo Soa. We met her before. She's the CEO of the African Women's Development Fund. She's going to be moderating our session. We have Jessica Horn, writer and senior advisor for the African Institute for Integrated Responses Against Violence to Violence Against Women. Elizabeth Vasquez is president, CEO, co-founder of We Connect International, and Lorraine Phillips, the director of logistics and distribution for Europe, Middle East, and Africa for ExxonMobil Chemicals. Theo, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gillian. So, this session, I hope, will be really fun for all of us. It's going to be a little bit, I hope, a little lighthearted. We want to look back a little bit over the last 3 days with our 3 really wonderful speakers who actually are a great representation of the diversity of the Women's Forum. I'm not going to introduce them formally. They're going to be introducing their interests and their background as they speak to you, because I want to give them the spotlight for this. But we're going to look back over the past 3 days to take a look at takeaways, impressions, what impressed you most, how you felt, and then we're going to look at that question of this roadmap of the next 10 years and what the visions are, but also what practically can be done on that journey. So I'm going to start with you, Lorraine. In terms of the last 3 days, your takeaways.
You know, this is actually the 4th year in a row I've had the opportunity of coming to this event, and every year I'm just amazed. And I'm amazed largely because we have people from every kind of background, stakeholders from government, from NGOs, from private sector like I am, and what I feel is most of what we found is common ground. And that really gives me hope that we can find some practical ways to find a roadmap to the future if we actually talk to each other. And this forum is just such an enabler for that.
Of the last 3 days, is there any one thing that made you think, this is different, or this is going to make me act differently when I get back to the office?
I think largely it's back to that area of common ground. We need to be able to leverage the expertise from different fields to get some practical solutions. And what I felt here is it's starting to happen, that we're finding some of the activities we choose to do jointly, private, public, are actually having an impact.
Elizabeth, what about you?
So I think my favorite part was being a part of the Mexican delegation. They are an amazing, amazing group. If you haven't met them, I'm sure you've been dancing with them last night. But it's a microcosm of what this forum represents. And I had the same wonderful experience in Brazil earlier this year. It's the Mary Gaudis and the Milan Viviers from the public sector coming together with private sector leaders from ExxonMobil and so many other great corporations that make this platform possible. Without that funding, without that leadership. But beyond the funding, what role can we all play as individuals and as leaders in our organizations to come to the table and not be satisfied with what we've done. We want to celebrate, and there's a lot of celebrating, but there's so much more. We have to, I think someone once said, you can either be comfortable or you can be an agent of change, but you can't be both. And I think it's good that we're not satisfied, that we're frustrated with the incremental progress that we've made, but then we have to do something about it. And I think this is an ideal forum. What Jacqueline and JC and Jennifer and many, many others have done with such a small, mighty team to bring us together to talk about, okay, fine, there's issues, there's challenges, but what are we going to do about it? That's what I love about this forum.
Great. And Jessica, this is your first time at the forum. So what have you felt over these past 3 days?
Okay, well, I have three kind of groups of ideas that have struck me. The first was a comment made by Eartha and Cousin on the first day. Women eat last. For me, that was kind of a regrounding in the reality that actually gendered inequality remains. It persists. Socially, economically, politically, women actually still are not equal when you look globally. And that, in a way, is a kind of a reminder that there's still a lot of work to do, even though a tremendous amount has happened. But in terms of the progress side, I appreciated the history lessons and the history reminders, and also stories from some of the women here about how they've managed to make change. And I think everybody that spoke about the process of making change spoke about the fact that they were only able to do it because other women around them supported them. And Christine Lagarde said last night, you cannot let your sisters down. So there's something there also about both the power of collective work, but also a kind of collective commitment and support that we need. And the last, to me, honestly, is the power of imagination. I work in women's rights and with women's rights activists, and I do very little work in terms of engaging with business and in business environments. So it's been interesting to hear some of the conversations, everything from thinking about new ways of creating organs, to collaborative economies that are facilitated by communication technologies. And I think that the power of imagination as actually a critical resource, something that the business sector is always fascinated by, and there's discussions about innovation, the interest in innovation. Innovation is inspired by imagination. And I think we can apply that same kind of vibrance of imagination to thinking about the questions of social inequality and economic inequality.
That's amazing. So, taking off on that point around imagination, I'm actually going to come back to you, Elizabeth, in terms of beginning to look forward. What is your vision, if we're talking about opportunities to really promote and embed women's rights over the next 10 years? What is your vision? And in addition to the vision, really thinking about the roadmap, what are the steps that we need to take to get there?
For me, I think it comes back to being uncomfortable, reaching out to individuals and organizations that we don't normally talk with, and engaging them and listening to them, making a point of going and just assuming that they have good ideas and they genuinely care about women's rights somewhere, maybe deep inside. But listen to what their challenges are and how they think they can best support this movement. And I think continues to be a movement, but I think we're still thinking about us as what is my organization, or what am I doing in this sector of women's empowerment? And I think instead we have to think of ourselves as systems change agents. So how are women the solutions to healthcare systems challenges? Energy systems challenges, education systems challenges, health and security systems challenges. I think we need to follow the money. We need to know what are governments spending their money on. It's systems and infrastructure. So how are we positioning ourselves to be at the center of the biggest challenges the world faces, including job creation. So what are we doing to get women to think about entrepreneurship, not just to be comfortable creating a solution, but to create much needed jobs for men and for women. So on a systems basis, but then how do you take that back to what can I as an individual do? And that goes back to thinking about what am I passionate about, and then how do I go out and find all the different individuals and organizations that together could help achieve that vision.
I completely agree. I think we have different skills, we have different competencies. And if we sit with a line between us and don't cross the line, then we aren't making the most of the capabilities that we have. So I think there's a strong ownership for us as we can have an influence on that dialogue and actually try to pull together where the core competencies are in the different sectors and actually agree on specific actions. And this is not a question of private sector throwing money at it. It's actually getting involved. It's hands-on, sharing where we can plan for sustainable structures and finance, but then working with the community to see, okay, so how's that really going to apply here? None of these programs should be seen as a one-size-fits-all. They have to be tailored to the local setting, and that's what the local community knows best about.
So what do you see in 10 years? What do you want to see?
I'd like to see more men here. I agree with the comment from the previous gentleman, because we're talking about these subjects here. There's a risk that we keep talking to ourselves as women who are out there being prepared to take risk. We need to bring everybody. This is not a question of let's make sure the other 50% of the talent is there. It's the 100% of talent. So I wish that in 10 years' time we had such a long list of actions that we were trying to work out which ones to choose and to measure progress.
Elizabeth, what about you? Because you spoke about the steps. What about the actual vision?
So for me, it's the same thing. It's yes, we have to think 10 years out, but we also have to think what can we do in our lifetime. And I mean, for me, it's how do I put myself out of business? How do I not have to keep talking about women and access to markets and wanting to be able to compete as equals to sell their products and services? So how do I put myself out of business? And so I think there's huge opportunities within a 10-year period to start positioning this so that everyone gets it. Oh, of course, women should have equal opportunity in markets or access to finance or in women's rights to good health care, an excellent education, all of those things. So it's also an exit strategy, right? How do we not keep talking about the same things over and over? What's our exit strategy?
Great. And Jessica, coming to you.
Sure. I mean, I love that idea of thinking about who are systems change experts. So, I mean, women's rights specialists, women's rights organizations, and women's rights advocates are system change experts when it comes to gender inequality, right? And it has been the people who've actually built up the legal frameworks. Those are the people who've built up the response systems and the models of intervention. And I think that it's critical that we keep supporting those system change experts to be able to do their work. And it's just interesting if I think to the reality of my colleagues. It's a space of deep discomfort. We have a lot of colleagues who've been killed for the work they do. We have a lot of colleagues who face death threats. We have a lot of colleagues who actually just literally get hardly paid. Interesting statistic. So Association for Women's Rights and Development did research to actually try and quantify the amount of money that women's rights organizations have globally. And they did a survey of 740 women's organizations in 140 countries, which kind of constitute, in some respects, probably the vanguard of women's rights. The total combined annual income of 740 women's organizations was $106 million. A median organizational income of $20,000 a year. The organizations are operating on $20,000 a year. And And so I think that for me is an issue in terms of 10 years to the future. I would love to see a change in that. I think that the infrastructural reality of women's rights activism needs to change. It needs to be scaled up. We need better support. We need better financing. All In for Her is this interesting, I've sort of learnt about it now. It's this interesting initiative that's actually trying to look at the power of women in business. And they did an assessment that showed that North American women control around $13 trillion. So, yeah, it's a lot of money. So again, to me, that's an interesting economic power. That's a tremendous economic force that I think we need to own. And then to also think about how that can also be leveraged in terms of supporting the system change experts and that kind of infrastructure of work that keeps pushing persistently from community level to international on the question of gender equality and women's rights.
So actually looking at that, and for all three of you, what are you thinking about in terms of practical steps? When you go back to your offices, your homes, wherever, tonight, tomorrow, Monday, what will you do differently, or what will you do more of? And even more importantly, what would you be saying to the women and the men sitting in this audience about what you hope that they would be doing? Because the sum you mentioned was enormous, but people in this room very likely control or have influence over even larger sums, but it's not just about the money. So what are you going to do? What would you say to other people sitting in this room that they should do? Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's about the intention. I think people come to this forum because, everybody here is genuinely committed to making a change. It could be making a change in the context of their own company. It could be making a change in terms of how their company does their work engaging communities. It could be, making a change in terms of direct support to communities. So I think this here is a kind of a community of common purpose in that sense. We're all actually really committed to the work we do. So I think sustaining that commitment is critical. I work in the universe of the body, right? I do that because we live in our body. So if you want to understand inequality, the inequality is here. 1 in 3 women globally, as we know, will experience violence in their lifetime. So if we want to make a change around that, I think we need to change some of the structural systems that create that situation. So for me, it's partly about investing in prevention. And I think that again, for all of us to keep kind of plugged into the debates, the latest information, the new knowledge, so that we can keep, again, innovating in terms of our responses. For me, again, on violence against women, there's really promising research that shows that prevention is possible in relatively short spaces of time. The second, I think, is that, I sit on the board of 2 women's funds, and I think it's, Wamakash and Urgent Action Fund Africa, and there I think it's important for us to actually keep continuing to expand this conversation in terms of engaging, committed people in business and corporate sectors. As I said, it's a common purpose issue, and I think we need to continue and expand that discussion. That's kind of from where I sit. And we were also having a really nice conversation, because we kind of come from slightly different backgrounds, and talking about this is critical. And to know each other and to engage in this kind of dialogue is absolutely critical, to get rid of some of the myths, and to also start understanding where the areas of potential common collaboration are.
Right. Lorraine.
Yes, I mean, I'm very much on the theme. We were having that discussion around common collaboration. Perhaps 2 areas I would comment on. Firstly, I sit in the industry sector, not in human rights. If I look at the sector I sit in, what I own, what I must drive forward is trying to engage all of the brains that we have. In science, technology, engineering and maths, the classic discussion, we simply aren't explaining to girls in schools what could lie ahead with a career based on that technology platform. We don't spend enough time bringing them in and actually showing them what their career could be. And the criticality for my company, for any of our investments, it's not about the money, it's about the resource, the human resource. If you look, the population will grow by another 2 billion by 2040. How are we going to support that? How are we going to have enough electricity? How are we going to be able to support those communities as they come up? It needs innovation. And it's not just going to 100% in terms of numbers of men and women, it's the brain power, because it changes the dynamic of innovation in a company like mine.
And how are you actually going to do that? Because there's one thing about talking about that, but there's something else about how you win people's hearts and minds and really get practical outcomes to some of the things we've been talking about over the past 3 days.
Yeah, if I look in the private sector, how do you win hearts and minds is the deal. What I would say has changed over the last 10 years is typically the leaders of a company get it. They get the business case for action. They're not quite sure how to turn that into reality. Now you see at least we get to a certain critical mass of women in leadership positions, still very much the minority, but we find a voice. And in a company like mine, we've actually gone out and spoken to the rest of the people, the graduates that are coming in, done surveys, had workshops, looked at the numbers, taken them back to our leaders. And I think if there was one thing I would want to fix in the next 10 years, it is that the middle management layer, the ones that either spot the talent or enable women and men that maybe don't all look the same to come through. We need to train them as to why it's important and what to do about it. And that's the way we avoid groupthink when we come to solving solutions. That's how we break out of that barrier.
Thank you. So, Elizabeth, I'm going to come to you just before I come to the audience, so people start thinking up questions, comments, etc. But Elizabeth, in terms of change, practical.
In terms of change, I think a lot of it truly, honestly, is just in our heads. I'm not saying there aren't real barriers. There are. I'm not saying that there aren't real things of victimization that are happening. There are. But I think if we want to truly empower women, we have to first and foremost assume that women are powerful. And if we assume that women are powerful, then we need to stop goofing around and funding NGOs at $20,000 a year. We need to step up and we need to spend money on the organizations that make women's empowerment possible.
And what are you going to do on Monday?
So it's interesting because at a personal level and then also at an organizational level, it's challenging to secure resources for the work that needs to be done when we keep doing many things for free, right? Why does the market want to pay for something when we as women, as a mother, as a wife, as a caretaker, we keep offering it for free. With the NGOs, we keep doing it for close to free. So how do we put a value and how do we communicate a value to the work that's being done, critical work in health and in stopping violence and in access to finance and in growing businesses and in any number of areas that add huge value to safety and security and education and what the world needs in terms of job creation and economic opportunity. So I think we just have to have a really, really serious conversation about the importance of the work, how to put value on it, and then how to secure the resources to make it happen. Women soon will control some $20 trillion in purchasing power. So I think we just have to decide to use it.
Yeah. Lorraine?
Yeah, I wanted to mention there's a study that we were involved with the United Nations Foundation, which was trying to find that roadmap. And I think the big conclusion is we have to look for practical, sustainable actions where you're building upon both what a company can bring and what the private sector, what the public sector and the local communities can bring. And there are many programs out there. Are we picking the right ones? Are we really working on those where we bring competency and that we're able to bring a sustainable solution that's owned by the organisation we're trying to support? It shouldn't just be money over the fence. We have to get our hands around it and see which ones of these programs actually bring value, because that means we're likely to continue to invest in them.
I think that that's one of the values of this kind of a forum, the bringing together of people working in different areas. But the really important thing is not just doing the talking, not just doing the listening, but actually hearing what people are saying and being prepared to know when you don't know enough to be working in a particular area, to be prepared to know when you need to go to someone else who can actually give you the expertise that you don't have in an area. And that's not always easy.
No, and I think this kind of forum, for me, I go to plenty of conferences, but they're usually my own industry.
Yeah.
That's not much help for some of these activities we're trying to support. This kind of event allows us to have a dialogue that's unique, but you're right, we can't have, that was really interesting, and on Monday morning go back to what we were doing before.
Yeah.
We have to write ourselves some kind of plan.
Yeah, great. I'm going to come to the audience for questions now. So, do people have questions, comments? Put your hands up and wave wildly so that I might actually even see you. Over there, great. Mary.
Thank you. I would like to make a comment around what Elizabeth Vasco has just said on the question of how we pay and support NGOs. And I would call on some of the male members who are here today from major companies and women who work in major companies and in smaller companies and in foundations, because people feel that NGOs should not be paid on a par with the business sector. NGO leaders are as qualified as everybody else, and they also have a huge responsibility for staff, and they have responsibility for their finances. And I would like to see I would like to say we should step up from this meeting to have a sort of campaign in a way that NGOs should be paid the same as the private sector. They're not to be seen as the poor relation. And I'd like to hear a few other comments about that.
I'll give you all a chance to comment on that later, but I'm really glad that you said that, because one of the figures that AWID came up with was actually about the fact that it's really women's organizations that are really at the very bottom of that pyramid that happens. So that total sum for was it how many? 740 organizations. I think it came to the annual budget of Greenpeace. I think that was the figure that was given. A third. Oh, 1/3 of Greenpeace. That's even worse. So I think that point about really seriously funding women's organizations to do women's work is going to be very important. Other questions, comments? Over there?
Hi, the timing is brilliant. I'm Sarah Burton from Greenpeace.
That really was not set up.
Not at all. And I didn't know that comparison was going to be made. But I have something personal I want to say. So I'm really devoted to saving the planet in my business career. But in my private life, I'm really devoted to feminist and women's issues. And I want to make a personal commitment that when I go back to my workplace, I will every year choose 2 women to mentor and sponsor in my organization. And I want to see the head of my organization, the next head of my organization, be a woman.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Because the other thing that reflects is that in civil society organizations, even though there's a huge number of women who work in those organizations, the number of women who lead those organizations is very, very few. There was a question over here. Oh.
Hello, my name is Nana Otu Oyote, and I'm from Forward. I think one of the things I want to really talk about is young women's-led organizations. And very often they seem to be the missing link. And without nurturing young women's organizations, we can never get them to be CEOs of big organizations. And there's very little space in terms of the systemic barriers that actually allows young women. And particularly for young women in Africa, we're finding there are a lot of dynamic in young women, but when it comes to charities, very little of them are coming through. And I think there's something missing, and how do we nurture them and bring them on board such that when we want to drop off, we can get them taking over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question and then allow the panel over here, and then allow you to comment on any of the comments that have come up.
Thank you very much for this inspiring debate. I have a question going back to the gender and discrepancies between men and women in terms of reaching high levels of executive empowerment. So, apart from the educational programs that some governments are getting into, improving the gap between, the genders, between male and female, don't you think that women as mothers, you have the leadership? I think so. I don't have kids, but I think that mothers, they have leadership in terms of education their own kids. Can't we start from that point in educating their own kids, male kids, sorry to say that, in order to better their view about the way they're going to grow up with this idea of empowering girls that will become women in high level of executive. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the three of you now. You can choose any of those comments, and hopefully we'll have time, and then I'll look at this side in case I've missed people whose hands were up.
Could I make a couple of comments? First of all, on the comment that was made by, I've forgotten your name, which is terrible, from Greenpeace, around mentorship. Because in a big corporation like mine, we finally are allowed to talk about mentorship in the open, right? It's not taboo anymore. And one of the big things that comes out of mentorship is not just that the mentee gets to learn, it's that the mentor gets to learn just as much. And in the women's organisations we have inside my company, more mentors are men than women, because it's kind of the nature of our profile still. And I tell you, every one of those men gets at least as much value out of that dialogue than the woman they're mentoring. So that's one point. Perhaps I'll pass on and come back.
I also agree about paying it forward. How do we find another person, in this case, as your example, a young person? I mean, I'm here because of Christina Alfonso, who's one of the young entrepreneurs who's being recognized, who introduced me to JC. So it's not just one way in terms of what can I do to help introduce her to corporations that want to support her work and to invest in her and her business. I got so much out of spending time with this up-and-coming, amazing young entrepreneur. So I think we really have to think differently about all the ways in which we as individuals can impact lives and be open to being impacted and not sort of take away the assumptions. I mean, whatever you think about ExxonMobil, the fact is you are doing amazing things and not telling anyone really about the investments you're making in women's economic empowerment all over the world, and opening up your supply chain, billions of dollars in sourcing from women-owned businesses over time in Mexico, in Nigeria, in Indonesia, in Canada. We've worked in many, many countries together. So just sort of thinking differently about not just what can you do in a philanthropic way, but in our purchasing, in how we spend our money. What can we do when we go back to look for women-owned businesses, and we as individuals and we as leaders of organizations making sure that at least some of our money is being spent on women.
Jessica.
I have to say, I'm really energized by action people, and this is obviously a group of action people, so very much appreciating the really pragmatic, direct examples and also statements about how things need to change. It's very true. When it comes to young women, just between Nana and Elizabeth, I love the echo there, because it's true that young women need investment and continued investment. Certainly for me, my mother kind of nurtured my politics very much, but actually in professional space, I've always worked in women's rights, but in professional space, there are a number of spaces and a number of people who really have supported me and continue to be amazing that way. The African Women's Leadership Institute was probably one of the only workshops I ever attended as a participant. I'm not a workshop attender, but also again was really important in terms of shaping my connection to African women's activism, as well as understandings of leadership. But that also there's this interesting thing about the leadership and learning not actually being unidirectional. Definitely in my work, young women are raising issues that a lot of older generation hadn't or were afraid to, particularly around issues of sexuality. I always say we're the condom generation. Our generation are the women that have had to face the realities of HIV, a more vocal space where we can actually speak about the violence we experience in our lives, a very different economic universe. And a lot of other issues, armed conflict at ridiculous rates, and so new technologies, and in many cases younger people tend to be more active in terms of using the technologies. So I think that it's a multi-directional generational conversation. But I do think, yes, it's important to keep investing in young women. I know a lot of people are very interested in girls' education. And I would just say in that context, all I would say is that putting a girl into school, in particular primary school, is never enough. You have to, all of us are, I think probably everybody in this room has been through tertiary education. University education is usually what it takes to actually make that level of a difference, particularly in technical skill. That secondly, schools are not necessarily safe. And we can't assume that. So again, whenever we think about anything we want young women to do, we have to think about all the other issues that those young women might face and make sure we're addressing that. So we're not just putting girls into school, we're putting girls into safe schools where curriculums are nurturing and interesting and dynamic. We're supporting them to go all the way through their education so they don't have to stop after secondary school because there's no money and they're forced back into the economy. And so again, thinking about very pragmatically about how we support young women, knowing the realities of the world and what they face.
I think that's very actionable. I mean, we can all go to the schools in our neighbourhood and talk about career options, talk about STEM subjects. We can go to universities and actually explain to not just the students, but perhaps the staff, what options they need to be allowing in their minds that the kids can actually progress to. Because they're not aware enough of what the career looks like. And careers today, if you study a certain subject, design is now linked to chemistry. That wasn't, it used to be all that, go be an art teacher or, that's not what it really is like today. So that's something very practical. Talk to people in education.
Great. I'm going to come round for some more comments. And I hope people haven't forgotten Mary Gowdy's challenge to you about what you might do around the funding part of and payment of civil society. So, are there any people on this side of the room? Because I kind of missed out on this side of the room. And at the back there. Oh, clearly there's nothing happening on this side of the room. Anyone? Before I move on round and see if there's anyone else on this side. Over where? Oh, at the very back.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to add a comment about mentorship. First of all, I would like to say about huge corporation, which supports, I'm a live proof that ExxonMobil supports programs all over the world because I'm from Russia and they are supporting right now the mentorship program for Russian women entrepreneurs from the different regions from Russia, and they are very much inspired, our women entrepreneurs. I wanted to comment on the, snowball effect of the mentorship program, because women being inspired by their mentors, they come to their regions, to the places where they live, and they start their own programs. So that is why it doesn't mean that only one organization is supported. The whole chain, and the whole, the whole, I don't know the right word, the whole network of women entrepreneurs is supported with the help of only one organization. So mentorship is really great, and ExxonMobil really supports all over the world the programs, and they work pretty well. So thank you.
Great. Any other questions, comments? I can't believe that this side of the room is so quiet. Over there?
Trying to help this side of the room. I've been lucky to navigate in quite a few big corporates and I think helped women's causes within those corporates. But I was very humbled yesterday when I heard about women defending women's rights and how they were putting their own lives at risk to do that. So if any of us are struggling in the room on how we can get funding towards those organisations, let's start with the women whose lives are in danger because they're defending human rights. So Jessica, I think, is one of them on the stage, and there's a couple of other women that I've been very, very lucky to meet. So if you have to prioritise, and in all organisations we have to prioritise, let's start putting the money to women who are not safe defending basic human rights.
I think that's a really important point. And on the African continent, in this last year, we've had a number of women who've been assassinated, and it was very clearly around their defense of women's rights. And there are a whole range of other women who are in jail at the moment even because of their defense of women's rights, but also human rights. Over there.
Thank you. I'm Vivian La from Junior Achievement, Asia Pacific. And I feel that I'm taking risks by raising this point at this time of the forum, because I think we all want to walk away feeling sort of like very energized and walking away feeling happy. But I want to go back to a point that you made. All this is rhetoric if we cannot bring back our goals. Mm-hmm. And we are in a room full of powerful women. We are in a room full of women who truly want to make a difference beyond treating. So we want actions. You say you want that energize you when we're talking about actions. So what could be the things that we can do collectively together with the Women's Forum to bring back our goals?
Okay. Okay, I think we've got someone else here.
I totally agree. We came up with a very out-of-the-box solution about midnight 2 nights ago, which, if anyone wants to hear it, come to me afterwards. But it's very strange. You were there. What I wanted to say as an American, but all of us are involved in campaigns around the world, and one of the elements is, of course, getting more women in politics. It really changes things a lot when you have our parliamentarians and congressmen being more women. We have a midterm election coming up, so any of you who are Americans, please give to women who are running, who really are on women's issues and are going to do something about climate change and all the issues that affect women, because unfortunately money still talks, and we need to change the composition of our governments right now.
Okay. Any other comments? And Lucy, are you in the room somewhere, or have you already gone? Is Lucy here still? No. It's just that Lucy is actually part of the Bring Back Our Girls campaign from Nigeria. And I think that she's really worth talking to, because there are very practical things. I'm not going to talk about them just yet, but I will talk about them before the end. Any final questions and comments before I hand back to our... Over where? Oh, at the very back.
Hello, my name is Sophie Gerardi. I'm a journalist. I just wanted to say that in Pakistan today, Asia Bibi was sentenced, well, her death sentence was confirmed by the appeal court. And what is her crime? She is a Christian, and she drank in a glass of water that was later used by Muslim women. And she was charged with blasphemy and condemned to death. And the death sentence has just been validated by the appeal court. I think the Women's Forum could probably take that cause also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And still at the very back, behind you.
Hello, Aurélie from Barcelona, Spain. I just wanted to thank you all, because I've been really boosted by these 2-3 last days. In Spain, I try to have this conversation all the time. The numbers that Christine Lagarde gave yesterday, all the conversation about mentorship, about salary gap, etc. And we still have a long way to go. But it's so refreshing to meet so many men and women who are actually putting this on the top of the conversation, that I come back to Spain really energized and ready to fight even more and to have a more balanced Spain in the coming years. So thank you to everybody here.
Okay, thank you. And there's over there. I don't always ignore the men, just occasionally.
Well, I just wanted to say something, I think, maybe from the men. And certainly, it's been amazing to be here as a man. It's been just incredible to hear the stories, or the passion, the enthusiasm, etc. And so I think, men are obviously part of the problem, but I think men also want to be part of the solution as well. So I think I like the aim of getting more men here. From a practical point of view, what I'd like to commit to is mentoring a woman. I also would like to be mentored by a woman as well, and I want to engage other men in what you're doing, and bring more men along next year and in future years too. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. Is there anyone that I've been ignoring before I go back to the panelists? No? Okay. Okay, let's start maybe with Elizabeth this time, on any of the comments, questions that were made.
I think it's really easy to get wrapped up in all of the reasons why we haven't advanced. There are so many. But at some point, we just, I think, again, have to make a decision that where we are now is just simply not acceptable. We're half the population. Come on, come on. What is it we want? And let's just do it. Let's just build it. Let's just fix it.
There were just some specifics. So on the women human rights defenders issue, absolutely. And there are, because it's been a problem for our community, the community has also developed a response in different ways. There is a Women Human Rights Defenders Coalition. They work with a special rapporteur also on women human rights defenders. There's an initiative in Mesoamerica, particularly in light of the tremendous violence that people are facing in light of narco-trafficking and organized crime, and what that means in terms of women who are working in those countries. The urgent action funds, which are global and in different regions, are also set up to basically be able to provide a response to someone who's at threat in 72 hours, and to be able to get them or their organization money quickly in order to actually be able to take action in an emergency situation. So there are some interesting initiatives that are there, but I agree that it needs more visibility. I appreciate the transnational solidarity, and I appreciate that you care so much. And I mean, I'm going to leave the specifics to Theo, but I do think it's important for us to think about why it is that women's security, that girls' security, is not really considered to be security, right? We freak out about all these other security concerns, but that many young girls are taken at gunpoint, in a country that has a pretty advanced military apparatus and could have done something to intervene, and we don't think that that's a problem. So I appreciate that. And again, I'll leave specifics to Theo. On the men question, I love these chairs. On the men question, where'd you go? Anyway. He's over there. Hi, sweetheart. Hey. You know what? The issue has never been individual men, and I think that's where we get it wrong. The problem is a system of gendered power that structures the world in men's collective interest. There have always been individual men who said, I don't like that, and who've often been ridiculed and isolated, right, in their own context of other men, because it's not serving men's collective power. The issue has never been about individual men, and I think if we start putting it that way, it's unhelpful. There've always been men who are allies, and they've also, unfortunately, been a minority, but there are women who also block the progress of women's rights. So I think it's about what is your ethical commitment to the issue, and what kind of resources, what kind of rethinking of yourself, of the way that you behave, being willing to share space and think about sharing space and challenging other men. And I think it's a really valuable and important role. So just to affirm that, it's not about individual men or not having a problem with individual men. And that just in general, I mean, yes, and as I said, I think we're already involved in the doing. The people that have come here are interested in the intersection of women, the economy, and society. Of course, we can always do more, but you know what? It's persistence, right? It's persistence. Keeping up on the issues. you know, knowing technically what we're doing, partnering with the right people. You know, we just got to keep pushing it and keeping it high on the agenda, because as you can see, the issues keep dropping. They drop really easily, you know. So we have to, that persistence is important. It's a long-term struggle. But I think step by step, we can get there and definitely enjoy each other in the process.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, we have to connect. We're able to connect. We met actually for the first time yesterday evening, and there was no barrier for the conversation. There was no power discussion. Within 30 seconds, we kind of were at each other's souls. Honestly, that's that kind of dialogue. It builds the trust that means we can actually work things jointly and make progress. And I think that is a unique skill that we're able to bring. The other comment I wanted to make was to the ladies, not there now, but who was talking about the younger generation. What are our responsibilities with the girls coming through? Well, actually, I have 2 boys. They see what I do as the norm, and what the roles of myself and that's their norm. And I actually would say that the young men coming through in our organisation under the age of 30, with partners, with having kids. Actually, what's encouraging to me is they don't notice whether they've got a male or a female boss. They've just got a boss or a line management. So my last comment is frustration. I don't want to wait another generation for that to happen. We need to make that happen now.
And I think that's really important. I'm going to give you each 30 seconds to give one message to people before they go away. But before I do that, I'm just actually going to address your question around Bring Back Our Girls. And I don't think you should ever apologize for bringing it up, because this isn't a forum about making people feel good. This is a forum about changing the world. And so please always bring up the difficult issues, because it's when we tackle the difficult issues that we move forward. Just very briefly, because I mentioned this a little bit on Wednesday, I think that there's still a lot of different things that people can do. And the people that are here at present have a voice and a reach that many of the women in Nigeria who are heading up the Bring Back Our Girls work don't have. So I think the important things that people can do here, depending on where you sit, who you can reach, who you can influence, are around things like influencing Northern and Western governments, influencing governments who made statements 6 months ago and have done very little since, putting pressure on your own governments to say, we need you to take action with the Nigerian government to get these girls back. We also need those of you who have access to resources to make sure that those resources are available, partly to the Nigerian government, but also to the civil society organizations that have kept the Bring Back Our Girls campaign at the forefront, who very often are the very organizations that have very little access to resources. And that's not just financial resources, because some of you work in companies that have real technological power. You have resources in terms of human resources, intellectual resources, maybe even intelligence resources that aren't being used. So look at what you can influence. Look at the power that you hold, both financial and otherwise, and then put that power to bear, supporting the people who have the local knowledge and expertise, because it can't be that someone from Washington has the answer. What it can be is that someone from Washington can work with people who are already on the ground to help boost those efforts. Because the truth of the matter is we have just got to do this. It's taking too long, and it actually is unforgivable. So please keep pushing it. Keep pushing all of us here, but keep pushing when you get back home. Don't just get back and forget. And even down to the Twitter campaign, which was so strong 3 months ago, and then just died away as people got interested in other things. Look at what power you have, and then use that power to bring to bear, to bring those girls back. So, 30 seconds. Let me start with Lorraine. I'll go around this way.
I want to make sure that we use 100% of the talent. I mean, that's my bottom line. If we are going to reach the innovation that we need to build over the next 10 years or 40 years, however long you want to say, if we don't actually engage a breadth of the perspective and a depth of different perspectives across men and women working together, we're not going to fulfill our potential. 100% of the talent.
Great. Elizabeth.
Totally agree. Just go out, leave here, and be really, really uncomfortable. Talk with people that you don't normally talk with and show them your passion. Help them understand why what we're doing here is absolutely critical for everyone. It is not a women's issue. This is a people's issue, people's opportunity to make this world a better place. So just make a commitment to don't share what you've learned. Not just the knowledge, but the people. So if you've made great connections here, we all have, share them with the people who weren't able to be a part of this forum. And then Mac, just continue to exponentially leverage what we've done here today, all week.
Jessica.
I guess I would just say keep your eyes turned towards justice. Look at everything you do, even if you work in a sector that seems somehow really far away from women's rights and equality. Think about everything you do, from your own personal spending to your investments, to the way you manage your own staff in your company, to the way you're thinking about your product, to the way you're engaging in diplomatic relations, to anything we do as the different kinds of people that are here. Keep your eyes on justice and keep asking the question, is what I'm doing in the context of this work and in the context of my life contributing to greater equality and contributing to justice?
That's great. I want to thank the three of you so much. It's been a really riveting discussion, and I hope you will catch these three, even before people go away. Please make use of the networks. Please make use of the knowledge that you've picked up over the last 3 days. Please actually hear what people are saying and know when to go to others. I hope people are going to be better able to support partners and to have the kind of partnerships which aren't about dictatorship, but are about true collaboration, because that is how we're going to move forward. Lorraine, Elizabeth, Jessica, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for taking part in this conversation, but being interested enough in these issues to come to the Women's Forum year after year.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Theo. Wonderful, wonderful discussion. Thanks to all of you.